In the heart of the Caribbean, where the sun shines bright and the winds carry the scent of salt and soil, the lights are going out.
As most of Puerto Rico is waking up without power this morning, another blackout plunging the island into darkness.
All of the power plants on the island unexpectedly shut down, leaving almost 1 million clients without power.
Puerto Rico's power grid is collapsing, not just from storms, but from decades of neglect, corruption, and controversial decisions made far from the people they affect. Once a symbol of modern progress, the island's electric system has become a cautionary tale. Blackouts are routine, bills are rising, and trust in those in charge running dangerously low. This is the story of how it all fell apart and what the future holds for Puerto Rico's power. In the mid-20th century, the island was undergoing a transformation. Under Operation Bootstrap, Puerto Rico aimed to industrialize, and electricity was essential to that vision. The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, was created as a government-owned utility tasked with lighting up the island and powering its future. For a time, it worked. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, PREPA expanded rapidly. Electricity reached rural communities, and new power plants were built. Puerto Rico became one of the most electrified regions in Latin America. But over the decades, cracks began to show. Maintenance was deferred, equipment aged, and PREPA, once a symbol of progress, fell into mismanagement and massive debt. By the early 2000s, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. PREPA was billions in debt with a grid that ran on expensive, imported fossil fuels, and little investment in modern technology or renewables. Yet, through it all, the lights mostly stayed on, until the storms came. By the early 2010s, Puerto Rico was facing a different kind of storm. One made not of wind or rain, but of debt, austerity, and deepening inequality.
Puerto Rico's government borrowed heavily to stay afloat. Now it owes $70 billion it may not be able to repay.
Years of economic stagnation, mass migration, and borrowing against the future had left the island buried in over $70 billion of public debt, with PREPA, the power authority, owing more than $9 million alone. To stay afloat, PREPA cut corners. Maintenance was deferred, staff were let go, and the aging grid, already outdated, became increasingly unstable. Across the island, equipment built decades ago was still in use. Substations hadn't been upgraded since the 70s. Repairs were temporary and failing fast. In 2016, the US Congress imposed a controversial solution, the Promesa Act, which created a federal fiscal oversight board to control Puerto Rico's finances. Locals called it La Junta. The board was unelected, operating with sweeping power. Its members included former Wall Street lawyers and bankers, some with direct ties to the same firms holding Puerto Rico's debt. Critics accused them of prioritizing creditors over the people. While schools were closed and pensions were slashed, consultants were paid millions in fees. Corruption and cronyism weren't just allegations, they were line items in the budget. With deep cuts and no plan for infrastructure investment, the power grid was left exposed. Even before Hurricane Maria, blackouts were becoming more frequent, more widespread, and then came the storm.
The first pictures now coming in from Puerto Rico after taking a direct hit. Hurricane Maria slamming into the island, and as you heard, one official saying the island is destroyed.
The first Category 4 storm to strike Puerto Rico in 85 years, slamming ashore around sunrise.
Hurricane Maria barreled through St. Croix overnight before roaring ashore in Puerto Rico.
September 2017. Puerto Rico, already battered by years of neglect and financial chaos, faced its greatest test yet. Hurricane Maria, a Category 4 storm, was barreling towards Puerto Rico. What was once a symbol of modernity, the island's power grid, would soon be reduced to rubble. Maria hit with unprecedented force, 155-mile-per-hour winds, torrential rain, and flooding that overwhelmed the island. The storm ravaged everything in its path. The fragile grid, already weakened by decades of neglect, couldn't withstand the fury. Within hours, Puerto Rico was plunged into darkness. No power, no water, no communications. It wasn't just a blackout, it was a total collapse. What followed was chaos. FEMA, the federal agency tasked with disaster response, was slow to act. Aid was delayed. Necessities, food, water, medicine, were hard to come by.
We spent the day looking for people getting emergency aid that's supposed to be flowing out of 11 FEMA distribution centers to local authorities around the island. What we found was confusion. Local officials couldn't point us to the centers where people could get relief supplies.
Hospitals ran out of power. Thousands were stranded without transportation. But the island's greatest tragedy wasn't just the storm, it was the aftermath. The grid remained down for months, with no clear plan for how to restore it. Repair crews arrived, but the task was monumental. Power lines, towers, and transformers all destroyed. The infrastructure was so badly damaged that it would take years to rebuild. For some, power didn't return for over a year. Businesses shut down, school closed. The economy, already fragile, spiraled deeper into crisis. The human toll was devastating. An estimated 3,000 people lost their lives due to the storm's direct and indirect effects. And for many Puerto Ricans, the pain of Maria would linger long after the storm had passed. Maria didn't just destroy homes, it shattered trust in the institutions that were supposed to protect the island. In the years that followed, Puerto Rico began the slow and painful process of rebuilding. But the power grid, broken in so many places, would take far longer to fix. The question remained, how would the island recover and who would be responsible for rebuilding what was lost? In June 2021, Puerto Rico handed over its power grid to a private company, Luma Energy. It was pitched as a solution, a new era, a $1.5 billion contract with a promise, fewer outages, faster repairs, and a path towards clean energy. But what Puerto Ricans got was more of the same, and in many ways worse. Within weeks of the transition, a substation fire triggered a massive blackout, leaving over 800,000 people without electricity. Luma said it wasn't their fault, but the outages kept coming, sometimes from storms, sometimes from overloaded equipment, sometimes for no clear reason at all. Their response? It was slow and disorganized. Communities sat in the dark for days. Critical infrastructure failed. Residents watched their food spoil, businesses close, and those who relied on medical devices to survive were left completely vulnerable. The company blamed the state of the grid, but they knew exactly what they were signing up for. Meanwhile, Luma executives were cashing in. CEO Wayne Stansby, who refused for months to disclose his salary, was reportedly earning over $1 million a year. Other high-ranking officials and consultants were pulling 6- and 7-figure payouts.
How many Luma employees executives earn over $200,000 and how many earn over $500,000?
I think it was asked that question earlier, but
and you didn't want to answer, right?
I'm not able to disclose employee salaries.
Backed by public money and protected by a contract that shielded them from legal liability or meaningful oversight. Lawmakers demanded transparency. Luma stonewalled. Subcontractor deals were kept secret. Performance metrics were hidden. Even basic questions like how much was being spent on local labor were met with silence or spin. And speaking of labor, over 4,000 experienced utility workers were either laid off or forced to reapply under Luma's new terms. Some walked away, others were replaced by contractors flown in from the mainland, many unfamiliar with the island's terrain, grid layout, or communities. But the bills, they kept going up. Luma charged more while delivering less. Between fuel cost adjustments, infrastructure fees, and rate hikes, Puerto Ricans were paying some of the highest energy costs in the US for one of the most unreliable systems in the hemisphere. And through it all, Luma's contract guaranteed their profits, even when the lights went out, even when the people protested, even when entire towns went days without power in the middle of summer. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was exploitation. Luma didn't just fail to fix the grid, they turned it into a business model, a slow, failing, taxpayer-funded machine proposed up by consultants, defended by politicians, and paid for by the very people left sweating in the dark. And in the darkness, a familiar feeling took hold. Betrayal. Not just by Luma, but by every leader who signed the contract, ignored the warnings, and called it progress. Because this wasn't just about electricity anymore. It was about control, about who suffers and who profits. While Luma handles getting electricity to homes and businesses, another private company now controls where that electricity comes from. In 2023, the government handed Puerto Rico's power generation system to Genera PR, a subsidiary of New Fortress Energy, a multinational firm with a track record of betting big on fossil fuels. Genera was given a 10-year, $22 million contract to operate Prepa's fleet of power plants, almost all of them outdated diesel and oil-burning facilities from the 60s and 70s. The pitch? Same as Luma's. More efficiency, more transparency, more reliability. But the reality? So far it's looked a lot like the past, only now with fewer answers. Just months after taking over, Genera's slow response to multiple outages drew public backlash. Critical generation units went offline, blackouts lasted longer, communications were vague. When asked what went wrong, officials pointed fingers at weather, at fuel supply, at Luma. But when the generators stop running, the lights don't come back on. Genera is now the ones holding the keys. Critics say the company walked into a gold mine of guaranteed profits with almost zero public oversight. They earn a flat management fee, regardless of how well the plants perform. If a generator fails, if fuel price spike, if the grid collapses, Genera still gets paid. And here's the kicker, they're not just running the plants, they're also buying the fuel. And guess who supplies that fuel? New Fortress Energy, their own parent company. That's right, the same company that profits from managing the generators also profits from selling them the gas. It's a textbook conflict of interest, and Puerto Rico is footing the bill again. Meanwhile, the island is legally required to shift to 100% renewable energy by 2050, but Genera PR has no clear plan for how or when that transition will happen. Instead, they've pushed for more natural gas infrastructure, more pipelines, more ports, more dependency. Despite solar energy now being cheaper, cleaner, and faster to deploy, Genera is doubling down on fossil fuels. Energy experts say it's a trap. The more Puerto Rico invests in gas, the harder and more expensive it becomes to move away from it. And every dollar spent locking in that future is a dollar not spent on building a new one. Genera says they're modernizing the system, but so far all Puerto Ricans have seen are more outages, more costs, and more contracts that benefit corporations over communities. With both generation and distribution now in the hands of private companies, each with guaranteed profits, minimal transparency, and little local accountability, Puerto Rico's energy system is starting to look less like a public service and more like a business model built to fail.
Crews are still working to restore power after an island-wide blackout across Puerto Rico. This was the second massive outage to hit the island this year.
And now we come to the reason why I made this whole video. On April 16th, 2025, Puerto Rico went dark again. At 12:38 p.m., a transmission failure triggered an island-wide blackout, cutting power to 1.4 million people and water to over 400,000. Hospital, airports, and businesses scrambled to stay afloat on backup generators. It was the second total blackout in less than 4 months. Luma Energy blamed vegetation and a failed protection system, but for many Puerto Ricans, it was deja vu. Another failure, another excuse. Governor Jennifer Gonzalez called it a shame for the people of Puerto Rico, but offered no immediate plan to end the cycle. The blackout cost the island an estimated $215 million per day, but the real cost was deeper. Trust, safety, and dignity. People without generators were left in the heat, in the dark, and in fear. Once again, the system failed and the people paid. But Puerto Ricans are not waiting quietly. Across the island, communities are building their own solutions. Rooftop solar, microgrids, and cooperatives. Grassroots movements are demanding the cancellation of Luma's contract and the creation of a truly public, accountable energy system. The question is no longer whether the current system is broken, because it is. The question is what comes next. Puerto Rico's grid is still fragile, its future is uncertain, and after years of reforms and billions spent, the lights still go out. At some point, it stops being a failure. It becomes the design. And for the people forced to live with it, promises aren't enough anymore.